Welcome everyone to the third in our series, hosted by the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies, focused on securing the U.S. manufacturing base for AI. For those of you who haven't attended a Potomac Institute webinar in the past, just a quick couple seconds about who we are as an organization. Potomac Institute sits at the intersection of business and government, focused on science and technology policy issues for national security. Doesn't only mean things for the federal government, as I mentioned, between business and government. What are the national security or economic security needs of the U.S. industry, commercial industry here, and what does that mean in the current geopolitical environment? We are joined after a few other sessions and years of conversation by Lucian Niemeyer, who is the CEO of Building Cybersecurity, to host a discussion today focused on those business models for AI and the data centers and what that means for the United States. Lucian, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Jen. And you missed the most important part. I'm on the board of regents for the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies, and I'm a proud member recently to join. It's a fantastic institute that I really do believe is addressing some cutting edge initiatives, particularly in the research and engineering space. So I'm thrilled to be a part of the institute and also to bring to you a 4-part webinar series on moving forward with AI, both in its applications and its infrastructure. So Jen, thank you so much. Thanks for the work of your team and the work of the Institute to allow us to bring in some pretty enlightening speakers. I am thrilled by who we have today. We'll get to that in a minute. But just a little bit about what we've been able to get done in the first 2 webinars. The first one, we talked about the beauty of AI, the incredible opportunity to have a positive impact on society overall, healthcare, engineering, our way of life. We spent a great amount of time on that. The last webinar was more on, okay, what do we need? And we focused on power. And I can't even tell you, Jen, even since our webinar a month ago, and I'm not saying that our webinar actually spurned the president to action, but just in the last month, we've had significant meetings in the White House. We've had significant discussions down in a huge energy conference down in Houston this week called CERA Week. But we've had the president himself meeting with hyperscalers to address the need for power for this country, to be able to meet the insatiable demand of artificial intelligence that ultimately we will need to be able to support. We talked a little bit last webinar about the fact we are in a power race in addition to an AI arms race, and the fact that we cannot lose this. So how can we take the demand signal, what we need as a country for artificial intelligence, and drive us towards more complete solutions on how do we power that innovation at a cost that will not break the backs of the ratepayers around the country. So what happened just 2 weeks ago, Jen, after our webinar, we'll take credit. The president did sign an affordability pledge that basically says, as we're building data centers, these hyperscalers must build what they call behind the meter, or what we call behind the meter large scale generation. In other words, invest in reliable AI, which means not just the data center itself and the infrastructure associated with that, but invest in reliable power to meet that need. And that is really what this administration is committed to, as how do we overcome that power deficit, that AI deficit? Because I think we have both. And when it comes to infrastructure, vis-a-vis our adversaries, how do we do it quickly and how do we do it effectively? So I just want to say that's been a fantastic result that's just come out in the last 2 weeks. But now we want to turn to some new issues as far as where do we see the Department of War and the Department of Energy with the Genesis mission. Where do we see AI moving forward? More importantly, as importantly, is what do we need for reliable and trusted infrastructure to support that? And I can't think of anybody else that we'd rather have than our 2 speakers here today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let them introduce themselves. I want to make sure, do we still have Trey? I think I've lost him on my screen, but I'm not sure if he's on with us. But
we lost him for a minute, but he'll be right back.
Yeah, no worries. So what I would like to do is have Emmanuel, Daniel, introduce yourself real quick. more importantly, Emmanuel, please let us know, the expertise you bring to this webinar, some of your background too, for a couple of minutes. I think it's incredibly impressive. So over to you, Emmanuel.
Perfect. Thank you, Lucian. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Great to be on this webinar, and thank you so much, Potomac Institute, for putting this together and giving an opportunity to be here and to share my views. From a background perspective, currently I am a VP at a company called QCELLS that focuses on on-site power management and energy management systems. Extremely relevant to what you're talking about, Lucian. Prior to my time here, I ran my own advisory, focusing on design, build, and operations of large-scale data centers, focusing on anything over 100 megawatts to over a gigawatt. And before that, I used to work at Microsoft, did a whole bunch of stuff there, including data centers and overall management of real estate, including building one of the largest digital twin platforms that was required for us to have complete visibility to how we are designing, building, and operating. Now, Lucian, a few key points that you mentioned, which I thought was absolutely fantastic, was if AI has to be successful, we have to have independence of power. And to drive that independence of power, it typically means we have to not solely depend on the grid. That's where a combination of grid connectivity along with on-site power generation starts to play. And for us to be leaders and masters of the AI race, being independent and having independence of power generation is going to be a key aspect of it. Now, while we are being independent of power, it is also important for us to understand how these systems are performing, how they're growing, how they're scaling out. And that's where the advent of continuous operations and monitoring through the lens of a digital twin starts to come in. In fact, looking at the volume and scale of things that we're doing, we're not building a platform for a company. We are building a platform for a nation in terms of the volume of data that is being generated and the amount of points and metrics that we are getting into.
Yeah, and look, you and I are both huge fans of digital twins. I think personally, and I think you share the opinion that done correctly, they have the ability to model and simulate everything around us, to include cancer cells or the way we build things, and it can really offer innovation. I know. I was really heartened by what the Department of Energy recently put out on Prometheus, another release within the last 2 weeks that creates the platform for how do you use a digital twin to address some of the engineering challenges of our country, starting with the development of a nuclear reactor. So you were using AI in order to accelerate the generation of power for AI.
Yep.
So there is a lot going on. I would love at some point to have the Potomac Institute, you and I, talk about digital twins specifically, what needs to be done to move that along. But in the case of today, I think what we really want to talk about is how do we digitally map certain scenarios, and specifically in the case of Department of War, how can we use AI to create a digital twin for the battle space, and more importantly, give us that information dominance. And there's no better person. And by the way, thanks, Trey. You almost gave me a heart attack when you dropped off there. And my blood pressure is historically high these days. Trey, I just want to give you a chance. We've gotten to know each other over the last few weeks. You have an amazing background on how you apply AI. So if you don't mind introducing yourself and a couple of key points and some of the things you've been seeing with your military background and how you apply AI. So over to you, Trey.
Thanks, Lucian. First, let me make sure you can hear me.
Yeah, gotcha. Very good.
Okay.
Very good. Yeah.
Yeah, because we're using a completely different setup than we did in the sound check before. I'm going through the phone as opposed to whatever the Wi-Fi is that we've got right now.
No worries.
No, thanks. I'm Trey Whitworth. I'm a retired Vice Admiral of the United States Navy. Just retired on the 1st of January. And in that last role was the director of the National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency, otherwise known as NGA. That will be relevant to our conversation as we talk about scale. Some of the other places that I've worked that I think are also instructive. I was the J2 to the chairman and to the Joint Staff for 3 years. I was also a J2 at a combatant command, U.S. Africa Command. I've worked at NSA as a flag officer. I was a J2 to Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, as well as the N2 for the group that we call DevGru, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. And I could go on, but frankly, all of those things have contributed to the discussion today when we talk about scale effectively, not only for storage, which is actually not what everybody's talking about, but mainly for compute. And at NGA, that was, I think, an underrepresented amount of scale when it comes to national security. And so for the last 3.5 years of my career, I tried to teach Americans about just how big the scale is that accompanies GeoInt. We're talking about imagery, full motion video, as well as cartography and I would just say the precision of location. So if anyone has ever taken a picture and they didn't mean to at high resolution, and then you try to send it in a text and it fails, and you know how frustrated you are, welcome to our world. Now take that times a gazillion. And that is the problem that we have in the GeoInt world. And yet we're still held to standards which are zero tolerance for mistakes, especially when you're dealing with something as important as positive identification. When you're talking about either preparation for combat or the conduct of combat, the buck has to stop with ensuring that you are satisfying distinction. One of the laws of armed conflict, the principle of the laws of armed conflict is to distinguish. Mm-hmm. And so the essence of that is, I would tell you, it's multi-ent, it's a lot of corroboration, but there's one ent that actually carries that load, and it's GeoInt. And that's why a lot of times the eureka moments that you have is you're trying to establish either something that's anomalous that is a problem or something that might be needing to be neutralized in combat. The eurekas sometimes happen because you go back in time, because some new contextual piece of information comes in, and you go back in time and you find what you were looking for all along. And that requires storage, but it also requires a tremendous amount of compute and humans along the way. Okay, and so the human and machine teaming at NGA was so important because now we have AI, of course, and we have the ability to allow humans to train these models, and to some degree to ensure the models can help train us a little bit and keep us in line as guardrails. We get tired every now and then, right? And so I would tell you it's a really good teaming concept, but it required a tremendous amount of compute, and it's still and that is growing exponentially because the number of ones and zeros coming from the sensors out there, that's going up exponentially as well. So I hope that's enough just to get us started.
Oh, it's great, but I got to tell you, as a former military officer, we're going to have to decipher a little bit of what you said for an audience that may not have a military background. So
that's all good.
Here's a short-term quiz. Please tell the audience what a 2 is.
Yeah, so the 2 is the director of intelligence. It goes back to the Napoleonic Code. And I should have said that. You're right.
No worries. So, that's okay. No. Hey, Admiral. Look, every retired it has to start. We want to just making sure we make that transition smoothly. So this is a gentle. Can you mentioned GeoInt? Can you just briefly talk about what the other intelligence functions or sources are other than GeoInt? So
your core ones are going to be signals intelligence, and so you're talking about signals that are generally in the RF radio frequency spectrum or in the electronic spectrum. And certainly we've got, a world-class national security agency that takes responsibility for SIGINT. HUMINT, so that is human intelligence, and that's largely a CIA responsibility, but DIA also has responsibilities for HUMINT. And then you've got GeoInt. So this is the geospatial piece that I just described. That also involves. It's really important to remember the cartographic piece. And so a lot of times we overlook that. You have to know where you are on the Earth. Okay, and the Earth is constantly changing. And so thank God we have people who are called geodesists who actually study the topography, the nap of the Earth, and the spin rate of the Earth, and the change of the Earth, so that the GPS constellation has a datum on which it can depend, and it doesn't just happen. And so that's a tremendous amount of data also for the navigational needs of the nation to establish a datum. And the datum is the one place where we know where we are. And all of the charts and maps that the United States military uses, and ostensibly a lot of the commercial world, goes back to a datum maintained by NGA And that datum is called WGS at 1984. It's World Geodetic System 1984. So that's a lot of data when you're talking about understanding the Earth from a navigational perspective. There are many other types of events, but those are the three core types of intelligence.
And so, and again, I think what we're addressing is you've got an opportunity here to, with AI, to take all those forms of SIGINT, human, GeoINT, and actually put it together for a user to be able to accurately use and to be able to assess. And a lot of times, and I think Emmanuel's picked up on this, that data is just so overwhelming. You've got to find a way to put it in a format that it can lead to information dominance, decision supremacy, whatever you want to call it. But how do you use those three forms, and there's other forms of intelligence, those three primary, to give a warfighter a decisive capability on the battlefield? And I think that's really what I think is the holy grail, and where AI in the end can have a huge impact is, okay, we need to have this infrastructure to process all this data in a way that somebody can use and be effective. And to me, it drives a stronger nation because we have a stronger way to respond. Emmanuel, I don't know if you have anything to add. I just know that from your perspective, we need to have the infrastructure to be able to process all this. What's your thoughts on that?
No, spot on, Lucian. And piggybacking off Admiral's Whitworth's points, if you look at ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, where you have drones, satellites, ground sensors, plenty of information coming in, you have to look at the volume of data that is being generated today. We didn't have this in the past. Today, if I'm talking about the amount of data that is going to be produced per day, you're talking anywhere from 150 terabytes to a petabyte of data. Drones by themselves, which have been in the news in the past couple of weeks, hundreds of drones can contribute or generate 15 to 60 terabytes of data a day. Now, to give context, it would take us years to generate 10, 20 terabytes of data, let alone a petabyte of data. Today, in an active situation, we are talking about generating a petabyte of data per day. What does that mean? It is impossible for us to go through a petabyte of data and to make sense out of it. So you are now talking about GPUs. If you need GPUs to make decisions, instant decisions, you're talking anywhere from 5,000 to 20,000 GPUs coming in. Now, it sounds really small, but then once you are looking at the amount of power needed to power up those GPUs, you're talking anywhere from 8 to 20 megawatts. Your high-rise buildings today are somewhere in the range of 5 to 10 megawatts. So just imagine in a battlefield situation, it's like building a skyscraper or more than a skyscraper, and the amount of power needed to be able to fuel that. And if you're going to talk about storage, networking, and all the elements tied to it, battlefields are distributed, right? So you will have your major site, and then you'll have your spoke sites spread across. How do you manage the amount of power that is going to be needed? So now you have to be able to generate and produce so that soldiers on the front lines and commanders on the front line are able to make decisions instantly by analyzing the data. You should be able to supply anywhere from 5 megawatts to 20 megawatts of power at scale. How do you make that amount of power portable? How are you going to make it? And that's where AI starts to come in. You want to use AI, you have to be able to generate that power. If you don't have that power, all the ISR data that is coming through is going to be impossible for an organization, let alone a bunch of organizations, to be able to interpret. So solving that and taking care of the amount of compute that is needed through the power that is needed is going to give us that edge solution. And that is why on-site power generation is going to become a necessity if we're going to get into more complex battlefield situations.
Yeah, there's no doubt.
Lucian, can I jump in for half a second?
Sure.
We've spent a lot of time talking about the military application or the military need and the national security need. From a commercial perspective, can somebody help with a comparison of how much data is generated per day on YouTube, or how much is available, right? And that's just a YouTube example. If you have another example, by all means use it. But just as a full motion video data storage, and people aren't searching it necessarily the same way that they would be in a battle space, right? But for the sake of our audience of understanding how much content is being generated on a daily, hourly, yearly basis, whatever analogy you can give me would be great.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I could take a stab at it. So, I'll take three common platforms that we all use: YouTube, Instagram, and Netflix. If you're talking about YouTube today, compared to when they started, has over 500 hours of video that gets uploaded per minute. So in terms of total volume, you're talking anywhere from 50 to 100 petabytes a day in terms of uploads alone. Instagram, on the other hand, you have hundreds of millions of photos and videos and feeds that comes through. They themselves are in the 5 to 20 petabyte kind of a range. Now take Netflix. Peak traffic of Netflix in terms of usage and why it's a platform. 15 to 20% of global internet traffic is on Netflix. They have over 200 odd million subscribers, and daily volume of data that is streamed globally is 300 to 600 petabytes that gets streamed out. So you're talking, this is world level data in terms of what the entire population is consuming and looking at. And when you compare what we were talking about for military applications, you see the size vastness, the entire world versus an intelligence community. And these numbers are very comparable. It is as much as data that we need on two sides to be able to manage it. But the difference is, for the commercial world, you have gigawatts of power on the grid. You have generators accessible to you. You can hook them up. You have these massive data centers. I think the last I checked, you have over 10,000 data centers globally that manage all this content, that are protected and priced. And those are the metrics we're talking about.
Yep. Admiral, anything to add? I know you spend a lot of time, because you do scrape public information, but you also have very unique ways of acquiring information. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, especially the what we call EOCL. So that's the electro-optic commercial layer. That's a very powerful portion of what we need at a combat support agency like NGA. And so there's a real premium right now on getting as much commercial data in addition to that exquisite data that we receive through satellites that were afforded through the NRO. So yeah, I can't say enough. I learned a lot just listening to Emmanuel there, just on the Netflix piece. That's amazing to me.
Yeah.
But then again, I'm in the visual domain, and I shouldn't be amazed.
Yeah. So I want to follow up because you and I have previously talked about trust, and I think that's becoming now a huge issue with any application for artificial intelligence. Do you trust not only that it's accurate, that it's free from hallucinations, but do you also trust that it's going to be available when you need it? So there's two aspects to trust there. Admiral, I know you've spent a lot of time with NGA making sure you did have trusted information you were passing on. Where do you think we need to go on both those issues, particularly when it comes to potential of reducing hallucinations? Now, I'm a personal believer, as AI gets more mature, we'll see more accuracy in the data. But where do you think we stand today, and how do we address trust?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that this will be an evolutionary concept for our society. It's becoming pretty revolutionary, I would say, in warfare and preparation for warfare. But most every single commander will demand a level of confidence and some sort of an assessment. And so if AI is rendering an assessment or an identity, that commander's going to want to see the homework, at least in an assessment of confidence. And a lot of times that really depends on how many layers contributed to, let's say, the identity of whatever it is that's being provided to that commander. And AI does that very, very well, actually. So do humans. I would say that this kind of falls in the same category as a lot of automation, where you want to have some human safeguards if in case you lose it, right? You're going to want to also have tradecraft preserved by humans to ensure that you can still do it. I think a great example would be that we're now teaching celestial navigation again, as opposed to just total reliance on GPS.
Yeah, no doubt.
I'm not far from all the way back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to follow up, Admiral, on you spent a lot of your career at National Geospatial-Intelligence, which is to me, the perfect manifestation of converting the physical world into data. Emmanuel and I have spent years talking about digital twins, and you've actually done it. you actually taken the physical world, through imagery and through other representations of the terrain, and you've created with some programs a decision-making tool for warfighters, which I think is incredibly effective. I think we're seeing the benefit of that right now with Maven. Talk a little bit about where do you think Maven needs to go, and ultimately, could we have wider applications for AI to digital twin the battle space? I'm a logistician, not an intel guy, so I'd be a 4, not a 2. And as you know, I'm concerned about moving material to the forward theater to be effective for the warfighter. And so my dream is to be able to digital twin a tip fit, a time-phase deployment schedule, or tip fit how we do logistics in theater, so a warfighter never has to worry about that. There's a sight picture of real-time situational awareness of what's happening in a theater when it comes to logistics. I know you've done some great work. Where do you see the sophistication of Maven being applied to other parts of the battle space?
It's a great question.
And can you explain what Maven is first? I'm so sorry. Let me give you a chance to talk about that.
Yeah, let me do this a little bit sequentially, because you started with digital twin, and I want to seize on that because I think you're right. Digital twin is the coin of the realm. The digital twin that NGA envisions, is the ultimate one for NGA, at least, would be that of the Earth, period. We're talking about every nook and cranny of the Earth. And just think about the manifestation of location over time. We used to have maps, and they were almost artistic in the old days, right? They were paper, and we would carry them with us. And then we started moving to files. And now we go to sea, or we go to our deployments, if you're part of the Army or the Air Force, with files. But even that's not quite good enough, because you never know what the next contingency will be. What we envision now will be a digital twin of the Earth that becomes a layer. Effectively, wherever you are, you have access to the navigational down to the 100th of a second level of specificity. So a digital twin of that ilk is a massive undertaking. And so even though I appreciate you're saying we've done it, we're doing it. Okay, that is that was a turnover item. Okay.
Yeah, it was pretty impressive what you've done already. So
yeah, thank you. Yeah. Now moving on to Maven, and this is very topical right now. Maven was a project. It was called Project Maven for the better part of 5 years, meant to excite the commercial sector to the defense needs of AI and vice versa. And it was actually successful. It was clear that this is part of an evolutionary, if not revolutionary, portion of combat and combat readiness. And the decision was taken in my first year at NGA, was taken by the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, that Maven should become a program of record under the sponsorship of NGA. I think the reason they did that was because of the enormity of the data that we're talking about in what's called target development. It is largely about the targeting cycle, and to ensure that as you go from target development, which identifies the right targets, identifies the targets themselves, and moves that into a decision matrix that involves what do you have available for that particular target, as well as how might it be addressed, and then ultimately assessment, and execution, of course. And then it goes right back into, do you need to do it again? Okay, that's just a very truncated version of the targeting cycle. But the really clunky big part of it was all that imagery. And so I thought that was a really smart decision by the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence to say, NGA, you need to honcho this. And we did. And in 11 months, we formed the first software pathway to validation for a program of record known as NGA Maven. The good news about that is it became very real for all the consumers who wanted it. And I'm talking about all the combatant commands, the CENTCOMs, the AFRICOMs, et cetera, as well as all the services. And so as I departed, every combatant command and every service was using Maven, NGA Maven, and by extension, Palantir's Maven Smart System. You've heard recently that there's been a major decision for MSS, Maven Smart System, to become a program of record. and that it will actually shift back to the CDAO, the Chief Digital and AI Officer of the DoD or DoW.
Yeah.
We can talk separately about that. I think that when we're talking about AI, though, speed. It's both speed and scale, and the advantage the AI brings is that ability to pour over so much data more quickly than humans had been able to assess some level of confidence and provide an aggregation in what we used to call a single pane of glass. And this was something that was very, very powerful, especially to most commanders, a lot of Army commanders in all the services now. They love the idea of a single pane of glass as opposed to multiple panes that they'd have to go to and then do the fusion mentally themselves. So that's Maven, and it does involve humans, and this was something that I used to get a lot of questions about. Well, are we now simply moving AI into decision making? And I would say, hey, the commander's still in charge. The commander's still making the decision, but with the advantage of the speed and scale of Maven. And we also created a responsible AI framework for training. Just if you're going to touch this code, we're going to ensure that you understand the laws of armed conflict and some of the principles that we adhere to. And then you're going to take a pledge. As we set you free and you've gotten your training and you're going to really make this great for combat and combat readiness, you're going to pledge or you're going to live up to those ideals. Okay. So that was very important. And then finally, we needed to ensure that with the addition of so many models, that we didn't have hobby shops that were just doing this for kind of as part-time work. Hey, let's see if this works. Because you're talking about we get back to that issue of distinction. That's a prerogative of the presidents and of the Secretary of Defenses and that combatant commanders. We need to make sure that we accredit those models, and so we establish a method for accrediting AI models.
Yeah, that's the trust that I'm concerned about.
Yes.
And again, I'm looking at the trust of the data, but more importantly, the trust of access. What I've been losing sleep at night is that, okay, as the warfighter becomes more reliant on digital twins and AI in the battle space, we got to make sure they have access to it in every step of the way, because to have that critical capability and all of a sudden lose it because an adversary has denied it, or there's some other power cut or something like that, what Emmanuel was talking about earlier, to me, that's devastation now, because we are becoming incredibly sophisticated and effective given this tool, Maven and other tools, for being able to twin the battle space, that we have to have that trust is going to be there. And I think that goes back to Emmanuel's point. We got to have that reliable power. You got to have that reliable infrastructure. You got to have the ability to grow. Because what I see, Admiral, is our reliance on AI beyond Maven is going to grow exponentially. And we got to have that trusted infrastructure in place to be able to make sure we can support that. I know, Emmanuel, you've been talking about that a lot, about how do we get to that, trust in the data center itself. You and I did a previous webinar addressing the cyber threats that are posed to data centers. But I think, reason why we titled this series Genesis Mission, because obviously that's what the federal government is trying to do, is to create that trusted platform, not just for national security, but for other reasons. But ultimately, we can trust what's going in there, and then we can also trust what's coming out. I don't know, Emmanuel, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I do, Lucian. And the one key point that we have to understand in the applications of AI is the amount of computing power needed to process information, right? And this is where a large portion of the difference starts to come in. Processing power and the speed of processing power for commercial applications is important, and we do have a large amount of processing power, but becomes even more critical for military applications, because it is not about streaming data or showing a live feed. It's about interpreting that data and making that information actionable. Hence, the amount of compute needed in a live battlefield situation or in a theater situation is a lot more important. The second aspect of it is how you're going to trust that the AI models, because today we've also started talking about the ability to hack AI models, right? And for it to change the inferencing that is given either through streams of false data or manipulating the data feed that is going to come into those systems. And that is where, we started talking about HITL, human in the loop, where the human in the loop has the ultimate decision to make the call that is this data relevant, and especially when we're dealing with power systems. So when you're talking about 20 megawatts of energy coming in, the other bottleneck, before I get to the power part, is you can scale GPUs. They're very easy to scale. You can scale 5, 10, 15, 20, 30. You can make them as many as you want, but you cannot scale power because power is a limited constraint that you have depending upon where you're at. It's not easy for me to bring generators and to generate 20 megawatts of power. It's huge. It's both in terms of land and volume to set up those generators, the noise, the fuel. Even if we talk about gas turbines, even if I'm setting up battery systems, okay, I still need around 4,000 square feet for every 2 or 3 megawatts of a battery system that I'm going to get. And your comment, Lucian, in terms of logistics, moving these things around is not easy. It is a Herculean task carting these things everywhere. Now, when I'm going to take a decision where I'm going to interpret the information to be able to optimize my power systems, manage my power systems, that same information could be used to blow them up. Very easily. I can overrun systems could overrun, okay, and there could be chaos. Hence the advent of bringing in a human in the loop, where all the decisions and recommendations that come out from these models are validated by someone. Now, they don't have to rehash the math, or they don't have to rehash the collateral that's coming out of it, but basically infer to say, does this actually make sense in terms of the conditions and situations that we're operating at? So having that real world experience complementing heavy duty intelligent processing power of the information coming in, putting them both together. Okay, in fact, I would argue the modern day operator has to work hand in hand. Hence, human in the loop based design for AI based systems is going to become critical so we can trust the AI and ensure that AI gives us the right recommendations, and we can always overwrite it if we choose to do so.
Yeah, I think we're at that point right now where we're going to have that decision about human in the loop because we're in the growth of AI where there's still the potential for either intentional or unintentional hallucinations or bad info going in. But on the other hand, that human in the loop it may also create a delay in being able to really rely on the effectiveness of AI to make a decision in the battle space very quickly. So I can see where we're going to, obviously we're going to have discussions on public policy here in the next few months on that because of, where a mistake in how we process data, it could have led to something that's not good. But I can see both sides, Emmanuel, where having that human in the loop, okay, but that human in the loop also has a limited processing power. It may ultimately negate the effectiveness of AI in the end. So I can see, as we grow trust, then we don't necessarily need as much of a human in the loop. I don't know, Admiral, if you have any thoughts on that. I know you've probably thought about it. That's just my first reaction.
It's an important issue. And most people these days will just go ahead and say it's human on the loop right now. It's, because things are happening very quickly, but the human is still a part, not necessarily an impediment, but on the loop for sure. I tend to look at it from an offensive and defensive perspective. We have had humans out of the loop defensively for decades. When you think about the Aegis weapon system, defensively, when you think about a close-in weapon system, something we call CWIS on ships, our sailors sleep well because it knows the parameters that a human has set for what is going to be designated a threat and neutralized. And so that has saved lives, that automatic setting. Different story on offensive, and that will be a rule of engagement that is set by the president when that time comes as to when decisions need to be rendered offensively against an unwitting enemy. That's a really, really important decision, and that would be at his level. And so everyone needs to prepare for that, just because the speeds are, to your point, the speeds are getting such and the data is becoming so rich that there may be a time that it is actually, it is in our best interest from a deterrence perspective, at least say that we can do it. But that decision will be at the executive level.
So you mentioned parameters, Admiral. And we had talked prior to about not necessarily just parameters on AI, but parameters on human input. Did you want to talk a little more about that? I know it was something we had talked right before our webinar about, where do when we talk parameters, you have to go both ways.
So I think that this ultimately will become an executive decision on whether the parameters exceed human capacity. And so there might be some scenarios that I think anyone who has been doing some reading and really thinking about this would agree that there might be some scenarios where the human just becomes overloaded and the human's going to need help. That commander, that will be between the commander and the commander in chief, and of course the Secretary of War. But right now, we like the teaming aspect because there's still tradecraft that these models need, in order to keep getting better, which is why, when people ask me, do you want to incentivize 30, 40-year veterans to leave your federal agency, in my case, NGA, I said, absolutely not. I need that experience to train these models, and I need to take full advantage of them. So I still like the idea of a team concept between the human and the machine.
Yeah, Trey, Lucian, can I build on that for just a half a second? One of the ways we've talked about this in other industries, as you have differing levels of access or differing levels of trust that's needed for a certain mission, whether it's military or commercial, it doesn't really matter when you describe mission. But you talk about it as almost like concentric circles, right? So this human in the loop has gotten to human on the loop because the technology has expanded to the point that, okay, we trust the technology to do all of these things in this sphere, but humans are still here. And we're slower to do that with military operations, particularly on offensive side compared to defensive. But we were slow to do that on the defensive side as well, to trust as compared to commercial systems will trust and verify frequently and often, right? They continue, it's continuous development. But this humans in the loop, I think, is if we start to think about how we're certifying these models, right? We're going to see it in certain levels and tiers, if you will, similar to cybersecurity, similar to, right? I can think of a lot of different examples that we use a similar model there. So I'm thinking from a policy perspective, you set those parameters, right? To the points that you were making. What are those thresholds that we're going to need somebody involved, or we say, okay, the software, the sensors, the integration of that is sufficient that the humans can just set and say, okay, I'm geofencing, whatever the parameters are, and they can set those to go forward. The last thing I want to add, and I promise I'll be quiet, this point, Trey, that you made about I needed all of that experience to be able to train these models brings me to a concern for the future as more models are created, and we don't necessarily have people that have been trained and have had all of those years of experience to know that gut check of it. Am I reading something that is real, that could be real, or I have no idea, so I have to take it at face value? Whether that's military or in industry, it doesn't really matter the way that I'm talking about it. But that's one of my biggest fears. And I know I can take us back 25, 30 years ago to Wikipedia, when Wikipedia was not a trusted source, still not citable if you look at academics, but it is the most reliable source for a lot of information. And the research that's been done there of how quickly things are changed back when somebody intentionally tries to change something has made Wikipedia a more trustworthy source. Yet it's still not citable from an academic perspective, because when you go back to look at it, it could have changed over time. I say that with sincerity about what these AI models are starting out as today, what they will be in the future, and the people that are being trained to create them, or the people that are using them for learning today, and what that means for 20, 30 years from now on that gut check. It's going to be a different sense in training our warfighters of the future.
I think you make a lot of important points. On gut checks, let's go with something called spot checks. I'm a big believer in, if you can't touch all the data to double check it, at least spot check it. This concept is employed even in some aspects of security by TSA at airports, right? Where they're just certain spot checks just to make sure that all systems are operating correctly. They just put an extra layer of I would say, of detail. This two things I would just offer. You're only as good as the information that's in your database and in the data from which you're drawing. I still am checking every now and then. I have one question that I ask some of the best models out there. I won't say which ones. On tell me the last 10 people in a specific job, and inevitably something's not quite right. Even as advanced as some of the models are these days, these AI engines, something's not quite right. Why? Because humans typically forget to update their BIOS. Okay, and so you're only as good as the data that it's working with. On a little bit more of a problematic piece, because that's controllable if you're just thorough in the way that you store your data and just your processes as an agency or as a country. A little bit more difficult here, it might be things you cannot control that are meant to misinform your models. And so in the 5 resolutions for the year of AI, I declared 2025 to be the year of AI at NGA. One of them was to actually form a tradecraft, a line of work at NGA that was dedicated to ensuring that we were not being misinformed in what we were seeing. And that's really important. And it's not just in the visual layer. I'll defer to Emmanuel. I'm sure he's been thinking the same way in some of his exploits.
Yeah, I would love to give an example, basically building up on what Admiral Trey said, as to why it is so important to have humans in the loop today. A very simple example. BESS systems have been growing in increasing popularity. In fact, BESS systems are there supporting our grids everywhere. A grid like Kaizo, the amount of input they get from BESS systems is massive. Now, if I take a look at a BESS system without optimization, let's say we don't have any AI. We'll have batteries that will discharge at the wrong time. We'll have cooling challenges. You'll have high peak demands. All this starts to come in. Now, the moment I'm going to bring in a model and I'm going to train it to say, hey, look, you know what, optimize the charging and discharging of my batteries. All of a sudden, over time, the system will learn what needs to happen. I'll be able to predict my loads better. I'll be able to take care of my dispatch, my pre-cooling, measure the outcomes and all the stuff that goes on. Now, what we fail to realize is AI is trained to do something to its fullest potential. It fails to look out for safety. It fails to look out for economic viability. And it fails to look out for the ability to be able to scale that out across sites. So it will use that battery and it will wear that battery out, where that battery will have a shorter life expectancy because AI has been told to optimize the battery for being able to generate power to consume into. Humans, based on their intelligence, will take an aspect of, hey, is it the right thing to do? Is it good? Am I able to look at both physics plus degradation? And that is the tacit human knowledge that now starts to bear importance, where I've got LLMs that optimize it. But the battery degradation curves, the inertia of the thermal inertia of the building, and the equipment limits are all value-added information that the human starts to bring in. In addition to that, safety. There is a massive growing concern that is it safe to allow AI to operate our core and critical systems, right? Because of situations like this where over-optimization could actually lead to catastrophic failure and damage. Humans will define value in terms of what the limits are, and a human will never cross those limits because they have, all humans have model good inside them, right? To say, well, hold on, I think this is not a good idea. Let's go and check with somebody and talk it out. AIs don't think that way because they are programmed to say, yep, this is the right thing to do. Let's go and do it. And ultimately, humans interpret context. What does it actually mean, both in intent and external context coming together? So they're able to bring all these parameters. The emotional element in these decisions is a big part of it. And the LLMs aren't there yet. That's why having humans to curate the options that come out from the LLMs, especially when we are talking about critical system design, is extremely important. And that's why we still need the operators, right? We still need them to be there.
So I'm sure we could go on. Believe it or not, we're running close on time, about 10 minutes left. And there's one issue that I really want to get to. And Emmanuel, you team me up because like you, I'm a bricks and mortar person. So for Admiral, I'm a military engineer, retired military engineer, Air Force engineer, but also an honorary CB, believe it or not. The Navy decided to do that for me. And our solemn responsibility is delivering warfighter capability to the warfighter, whether it be a runway, whether it be a hangar, whether it be a pier or whatever. We have to be sure that we can get the warfighter the infrastructure they need. Emmanuel and I have been obsessing over, in the realm of AI, what is the infrastructure and the reliability infrastructure that's going to be absolutely necessary for the processing of reliable and assured access to AI. And that is something that I know you're more on the operations side. I'm not sure, Admiral, if you ever kind of worried what data center you're rolling your AI through or processing it through. I'm a big believer in sovereign AI, that we've got to create a domestic enterprise of data centers that, without any reliance on anybody outside the U.S. to process our national security AI. But I didn't want to leave this webinar without focusing what can we do to build that infrastructure in place. So as NGA grows their use of AI, but more importantly, other parts of our planning, operational planning uses AI. How do we have reliable and trusted infrastructure in place? And I know, Emmanuel, we've been talking about it. I do believe there are models available. And look, I'm looking to SpaceX and Starlink, which was a commercially developed capability for which right now nations are either have defeat or victory based on their access to Starlink. So I see the private sector rising up here to meet this need. The question is, do they prioritize what you just mentioned, Emmanuel? Safety, security, access, and more importantly, free of exploitation or infiltration. Are we prioritizing that in the national AI infrastructure we're building? I kind of wanted to spend a couple minutes on that, but I also want to give you both an opportunity to talk about what you're doing privately, but I do want to address that question. So I'll turn it over to Emmanuel and Admiral. If you've got anything you want to add to that, that'd be great. But
I'll just tee up.
I think we need to go.
I'm gonna agree with you and tee up exactly what Emmanuel said about 15 minutes ago. For me, I found myself saying the word compute as the imperative for what we needed in order to grow, with the sensors growing as well. So the amount of data growing with the wonderful sensor network that we have, especially up in space, I found myself saying, let's make sure we have enough compute. That translates into power, and which is one of the, I would say, kind of one of the hallmarks of this discussion.
Yes,
and I'll now tee it over to Emmanuel, who's the pro who actually does this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Admiral. And Lucian, to your question, the importance of sovereign AI is more important now than ever. The reason for that is because the ability to influence. One, we talk about data leakage. Most of the data that we're using is core and critical data, even with respect to power system design. The way we are going to augment our grids in the US today so that we are still able to bring large-scale manufacturing back into the US, where we are enabling the manufacturers to be able to do on-site generation so that you take what you want from the grid, but at the same time, you generate that power for yourself. And the on-site power that you are able to generate, you can give it back to the grid. So now there's a whole discussion on us being self-reliant on power generation so that we can actually do grid stabilization with commercial organizations contributing towards our national grids, right? And these are very active discussions that have started to happen today. Now, to do that, we need that, because without that, how are we going to power our massive gigawatt data center campuses? So you see a lot of commercial organizations that have started buying power companies or getting into contract with power companies or talking about generating power themselves, which 10 years ago was never the case. We thought the grid would last forever and we would never need it. The second part of it is the lack of resilience. If we are going to depend now, your comment with respect to Starlink and all these comments coming in, because they don't have resiliency in terms of how their systems are connected and backed up, and that is not something that we can rely on external powers or external governments to do for us. We have to be resilient in terms of how we are connected, because there's going to be a certain point of time without intelligence, we are not going to be able to go through all the information that gets. I mean, just imagine if I have to watch 10 movies and come out with a synthesis in 5 minutes, where each movie is 2 hours. It is impossible for me to do so. Even reading a brief that is 50 pages long and coming out with a synthesis, it's just not practical for us to respond within that time. Now, this is where the importance of resiliency starts to come in. The third most important point, which I think is going to become extremely critical, is around the need for domestic regulation, okay, in terms of the safety and security of the AI models that we are creating and the operations aspects that starts to fit in. Now, I get the importance of international collaboration, but there are certain points in time where domestic policy and domestic need has to trump over what international need is. Because if we don't set it up as an example today, what is our backup? What is our direction? If we didn't have AI DCs, if we didn't have the ability to generate power, if we didn't have the ability to be able to set direction in terms of data volume and GPU growth, we wouldn't be ahead in this AI race. And that's why, I strongly believe in sovereign AI and the need for us to propagate it.
Yeah. So I do want to give you both a chance to talk about privately what you're doing, but I want to end just with one shameless self-promotion. What my team, and we just actually met with the Navy yesterday, by building large-scale power generation, a gigapower on a military base, and building a data center complex that can be used by the Department of War, building it right next door to that power plant, and allowing hyperscalers to come in and install their GPUs and then turn around and sell that AI back to the federal government. To me, that is the way forward, because it gives you that behind the meter reliable generation. It gives you a protected series of data centers, and that can be built to mil specs to include SCIF standards. And then it offers back to the government a opportunity to lease or buy AI as a service in data centers that were funded by the private sector, so no government funding. So that is ultimately, I think, a very positive solution that we're working on to get to that sovereign AI, get to that reliable power, and allow DOW to have access to new gigs of compute power that they right now are relying on private sector data centers. So anyway, just wanted to let you know that there's more to come on that. We'll cover that also in the next webinar. Admiral, you left active duty service in November, I believe, of last year, and I think you just now are working on a new entity, or you just joined a new entity. A little bit about what you're working on now.
You bet. So data retirement was the 1st of January. And based on integrity, frankly, of the leadership, and I'll just specify a guy named Paul Breitenbach, the founder of Priceline, and CEO. He was someone who I trusted. This was a values-based decision to go with our 4 technologies, and I'm the president for national security and defense for R4. Their specialty, our specialty, is forming digital twins out of unstructured data, and a lot of it, and very quickly, so that you can be predictive and apply AI models to prediction and to recommendations. And so, when I saw that they were actually working to solve the food desert problem by lining up expiring food in fields, on trucks, and in shelves with where prices are so high because of a paucity of supply, and seeing a resultant decrease in food prices by 30%, I went with them. I said, I know how to break militaries. I know how to break things. Yes, this is powerful technology for the defense of the United States, but I can go with a company that is that values driven. They started with food. And so I'm working for R4.
All right, Emmanuel, real quick, we're down to like the last 90 seconds. Yeah. What are you working on today?
So currently, I am the VP of Engineering and Solution Development at a company called QCELLS, where I am helping people design and bring BYOC, bring your own capacity. What that typically means is, if you want to build a data center, if you want to build anything, and you have to do power management, on-site generation, coordination of systems, and optimize how energy is being consumed across your facility so that you can be effectively independent. Those are the systems that we design and build, all the way from the hardware needed to generate that power and the software needed to manage and optimize that power for consumption, so you can truly be independent and manage that power yourself.
And you're also on LinkedIn, right? You haven't taken yourself off social media, and we'll get your contact information out as well.
Perfect.
So, hey, Jen, I mean, we blew through an hour. I had left questions on the table for our guests, but I just want to say thank you to the Potomac Institute. Admiral Whitworth and Emmanuel, thank you for your time for the hour. I'm hoping you found entertaining. I know I did. And back over to you, Jen. And again, thank you for the Potomac Institute for Public Studies for sponsoring this series. We got one more to go next month, and I'm hoping folks who listen in found this informational and educational, and I'm looking forward to next month. Over to you, Jen.
Yeah, thank you all, gentlemen. Thank you so much for your time today and preparing for this. While this is just the third and there is one more, this hour, I think, went by faster than almost anybody that we've had on a webinar in quite some time. And Lucian, to your point, like I also have questions left on the table, so that's great. It means that we're hitting the right issues. The fact that so much has changed since a month ago, since our last session, and we're seeing that driving, it's not necessarily because of us, right? But
I'll take credit, but go ahead.
Good. No, but it is because we're talking about this with the right audience and the right speakers at the right time. And so the conversations that are happening are in real life, not just because this is virtual, but things happen, not just in this administration and quickly, but because this is that time for that evolution to change. Everybody was waiting for AI to be a real thing before they started putting policies in place, and now they can't do it fast enough.
Yeah, no, it's a real thing for sure. All right, hey,
so thank you all so much.
Yeah.
And thank you to all of our guests for coming in, and we will check in a month. Take care.
Absolutely. Thank you.